Good morning. My name is Duncan Campbell. I'm a member of the grounds crew for Oudolf Garden Detroit. This is a YouTube training for our garden guides at Oudolf Garden Detroit on Belle Isle in Detroit, Michigan. I can be reached at duncan@ouldolfgardendetroit.org or also through info@ouldolfgardendetroit.org. We're going to have roughly a 1 hour, maybe closer to 40 minutes as far as quick training to give you some background on this project so that you can better relate to the visitors that we will have at the garden when the construction fence comes down and after our official opening. So we're going to talk a little bit about who Pete Oudolf is, and Oudolf or Oudolf are both appropriate and both are used. We're going to talk a little bit about what Oudolf Garden Detroit is as an organization and also as a site of the garden on Belle Isle. We're going to talk a little bit about communications and education and then talk about what's coming up as we are getting very close to our official opening on the 28th of August 2021. So, what is a garden guide? I basically, along with the grounds crew, designed this to be like a docent at the DIA, which I am one of. It's a new program that we're going to build together. We won't get it perfect the first time, but we will grow together and get it done. We are storytellers. We are there to welcome people. We are there to answer questions. And from the digital side, to have them go to ouldolfgardendetroit.org to experience some of the digital educational capabilities that we have available on the website that can be accessed via their computer, via a cellular enabled tablet, or via their smartphone while they're in the garden with the utilize it and also utilize GPS with it. So the idea on the garden guides is that we're going to set up weekend shifts to have our ambassadors, our docents, our garden guides in the garden to be friendly, to be welcoming to all the visitors for this great garden for Detroit and for everyone that visits the garden. We want to be open. If you don't know the answer to a question, just say, I don't know. We're all learning together, and we don't all have the answers, and people respect that when you don't have the answer to a question. This is going to be a little bit of an information dump. You'll not absorb everything. Don't worry about it. But I think as you use our website and review this particular YouTube video, we're just going to get going. And we look forward to your input and feedback. And please feel free to reach out to me at duncan@ouldolfgardendetroit.org. So some of the basic rules, COVID restrictions are going to be varying going forward, especially with the Delta variant becoming apparent. But this is an outdoor venue, which works very well in these types of situations. Dogs must be on leashes and owners must pick up after them. Bicycles are to be walked in the garden if they would like to view the garden. Reason being is our crushed granite paths leave tracks, etc. if people are riding their bikes through the garden, and we're just trying to respect the garden. Obviously, no walking in the beds and no cutting or taking plants. We are there to do outreach, be welcoming, but also to instill respect for the garden because this is a piece of art in plant material. We're going to set up weekend shifts during the growing season, and the email will be sent out with shifts like this upcoming in-person training session that we have coming up this particular Sunday. So let's talk about Pete. How did it all begin? It started back in 2016 with basically a love letter from Detroit. The initial members tried to figure out if we knew someone who knew Pete, etc. And in the end, we just wrote him a love letter from Detroit that was signed by Maura Campbell, Richard Thomas, and Gene Hudson. And he replied between Christmas and New Year's, and we had our first basically Zoom call. It was a Skype call in January of 2017. So this project has been long in coming to get to where we are today with the official opening coming up. But it started with a love letter from Detroit. Now, who is Pete? Pete is really the rock star of international garden and plant designers in the world. He is the designer of the High Line in New York, which is one of the top tourist attractions in Manhattan, as well as Lurie Garden, which is part of the Millennium Park in Chicago, which is directly north and across the street from the Chicago Art Institute. Lurie Garden has 10 million visitors a year. He pioneered the Dutch wave, which is a naturalistic planting style. 2018, he was one of 100 in the Architectural Digest. He's a visiting professor of planting and design at the University of Sheffield. He's a noted author, which we'll touch on. He's also an open source designer and enjoys sharing his designs and his knowledge with everyone who would like to know. He was the inaugural recipient of the Royal Horticultural Society Hero Award. As well, he was the Medal of Honor winner for the Garden Club of America in 2018. These are just a few of the books that he has authored. Many times he co-authors with other authors on his planting design and his gardens. I highly recommend reading some of them. They're absolutely fascinating and pictorially absolutely gorgeous. This is a look at his studio. Everything he does is hand-drawn. He's very tactile. He's very hands-on. He draws, taking into account everything that will come into play in regards to his gardens going forward. So this is what it looks like. He's a heavy user of Sharpies and colored pencils, etc., to create his designs. And his naturalistic, curated landscape gardens are a mix of structure and color, bringing plants together that coexist very well in very dense groupings. They're lush and provocative, and they're a great source and resource for pollinators. This is what his designs look like, and you can see the curvilinear nature and the color that each of these little areas represents a particular plant that's going in one area and how it's juxtaposed to so many others. Well, what started out as a love letter turned into what we call the first date, which was April of 2017, which was his first visit to Detroit. We took Pete everywhere. We took him to the east side depopulated. We took him to Lafayette Park. We took him to Midtown, to downtown, to Corktown, to New Center, to Eastern Market, to West Detroit, Southwest Detroit. What he loved about Detroit is he loved the street art. He loved the attitude of Detroiters, the can-do, the grittiness, the entrepreneurship, and really the vibe. He says Detroit just vibrates, and he was really taken by it, and he said it was like no other tour he had ever had of any city that he visited. And he subsequently came back a few more times. Here he is with his family. This is in August of 2019, where he brought his two boys and his lovely wife Anya to Detroit so that they could experience what he had found in Detroit and what he loved about Detroit. And this is a shot in Eastern Market. So let's talk about the site. You may be aware that Belle Isle was originally had a design by the renowned and probably the first landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, in 1883. And this was his master design for Belle Isle or Hog Island. That the city had purchased and were going to create a park out of it. It is roughly the same size as Central Park, which Frederick Law Olmsted also designed along with Charles Voss. You can see some of the elements were followed in regards to the natural area on the east side, the central spine coming down, and this is where, in the top left-hand corner, is where the ferries arrived on the island. Well, the city of Detroit didn't pay him, and they followed his master plan to a degree, but not closely. Here's the island today. Sunset Point is on your left. This, as a matter of fact, was added landfill to create the point on the island, on the west side of the island. You can see the MacArthur Bridge coming across, and then our garden site on the right-hand side. And what Pete said, that this was the most natural location, and he selected the site himself in April of 2017. And he saw things that we didn't necessarily see because he's a connector. He brings locations together. Think of the High Line as a linear garden. Think of Lurie Garden connecting the Frank Gehry outdoor theater with the Chicago Art Institute. He is connecting the cultural district, which is this area on the right-hand side of your screen on Belle Isle, and he's bringing it together. So here's the site itself. You're familiar with the Nancy Brown Peace Carillon in the center. On the bottom is the Canadian Peace Monument, or the International Peace Monument. The Remick Bandshell is to the west. We're looking south toward Canada here. So the Remick is on the west, and then on your left or on the east side is the Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory, the Belle Isle Aquarium, and the Dawson Great Lakes Museum on the top. Here is the garden site itself. On that particular site, around the Carillon and in front of the Carillon. So here's the design for the garden. We're looking from the south to the north now. Now this is the second design that Pete did for the site as far as master plan. The original plan had encompassed the Carillon on either side, where you see the green grass represented, which is the wetlands area now. And what we found is then in July of 2019, after we had officially broken ground to start construction, the high water we had on the Great Lakes showed that about a third to 40% of his original design was going to be underwater. And so Pete was in town. He understood. He went back to the drawing boards, and we completely redesigned the garden. And we moved the garden back from the shoreline and back from the Carillon, and we basically elevated it up 3 feet in the air and put a drainage layer at the base underneath it 3 feet down with gravel and conduit to let the garden drain into this wetlands area that is now surrounding the Carillon itself. On the far left-hand side, you see the rain garden. This is a bioretention rain garden to pull stormwater off of the street and retain it on the site and let it naturally leach into the ground. What you'll see on this design is that we have 15 main beds in the main part of the garden. And from the left to the right, these are C beds, and then B beds, and then A beds, then B again, and then A again, and then C, and then B, and then another A over here. And we're going to talk about these individual plans as far as the design. The grayish area is the crushed granite that we don't want people riding their bikes on. And then we have an ADA walkway across the top of the garden on the south side, encircling the garden on two sides. And then handicap parking lot is, which has 3 spaces, is just off of the left of your screen here. So let's talk about the site. So the Nancy Brown Peace Caroline was a crowd funded by school children in honor of Nancy Brown, which is a nom de plume or a pseudonym, and she was a columnist for her Experience column in Detroit, and it was built in 1939 and dedicated in 1940. It's constructed out of Indiana, Bloomington, limestone. It is Art Deco and Neo Gothic. You can see the Neo Gothic with the slit windows and the pointed arches and the lacework, and then the lacework on the top, etc. And then there are medallions all the way around, which are low-level reliefs in very much of an Art Deco design, very much similar to Cranbrook as far as influence aesthetically. It is in need of renovation. But that was not part of the scope of this project. But we have now created a highlight for the site itself, and it's glorious in the garden. On the other side, and frankly, this is the best seat in the house, is the Canadian Peace Monument. And so this was dedicated in 1941, celebrating the peaceful relationship between Canada and the United States. So this was just before World War II. As a matter of fact, the challenge with the Canadian Peace Monument is when we raised the garden up 3 feet in the air, the Peace Monument was 2.5 feet too low. So we had to disassemble the whole thing and basically pour a new concrete foundation for it and then reassemble it in exactly the same spot, but just 2.5 feet higher than it was before. And if you want the best seat in the house, sit in one of these and just enjoy the garden. So he's also tying together other elements of this cultural district. Albert Kahn, one of the great, if not the greatest, architects of Detroit, designed this in 1904. The Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory. Glass and metal, originally glass and wood, following, Paxton's Crystal Palace in the UK from the mid-19th century. It's a glorious piece. The conservatory is lovely on the inside. And then that opens into the geometric, formal gardens on the west side of the conservatory itself. And then across the street is Oudolf Garden, Detroit. On the other side of the Whitcomb is the aquarium, and this was done with his senior partner, George Mason and Albert Kahn, designing the Belle Isle Aquarium. And if you haven't been to it, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely glorious. And the interior tiled vault, barrel vault on the interior, just glistens with light. And this has a copper roof, has Mannerist influences to its facade, etc. Highly recommend it. The other piece on the other side to the west is the Jerome Remick bandshell. This was completed in 1950. This is the second bandshell dedicated to Jerome Remick. Jerome Remick was the king of sheet music in the 1920s and sold millions of copies of printed sheet music across the United States. It was based right in Detroit. And then in June of 1929, well before the stock market crash of 1929, he sold his business for cash and did quite well. It's a mid-century icon. It also is in need of renovation. We hope that the Oudolf Garden Detroit project creates a halo effect to have some of these architectural gems renovated to complement the garden itself. And then one you may not be aware of is the Flynn Pavilion. This was originally designed as a Flynn skating pavilion. We don't freeze over as we once did in Tacoma, Lake Tacoma, but it was designed by Ario Saarinen and his partner at the time of Robert Swanson. Ario Saarinen went on to design the arch in St. Louis as well as a number of other architectural gems like the TWA terminal, as well as a terminal at Dulles. Highly recommend taking a look at mid-century, lovely wood interior, square windows, recessed, horizontal. I think you'll like it. So Pete's gardens are open year round. He likes gardens in the middle of winter because besides being a colorist, he's also a structuralist. And so he likes the seed pods and the stems and what things look like after they have passed and they go and die in the winter. And he leaves everything in place until a cutback in late February, early March. It also provides shelter and food for birds and insects during the winter months. His plants are selected to be durable, but also create beauty and ecology. He's highlighting form, texture, and color. He mixes Michigan natives and North Central American natives with other well-behaved perennials, including grasses and bulbs, to create a curated landscape that is outstanding in regards to the lushness that it brings to the eye. It's durable, long-lasting, lush, wild, and evocative. And that's why we are so excited about this garden. It's also a sanctuary in the city, with the four-season plantings to support the biodiversity of pollinators, birds, insects, wildlife, and of course people too. Here's just an example of one of our monarchs taking rest. So we talked about ecological management. I just referred to it briefly. It is cut back once a year, and we basically used a mulching mower in the end of February, beginning of March, and we leave all the debris in place. No fertilizers are utilized in the garden, and there's no waste, and everything's kept in place and used to rejuvenate the beds themselves. And this is our volunteer cleanup and cutback this spring. Some are cut down by hand depending on size and scope. So what is Oudolf Garden Detroit? Oudolf Garden Detroit is run by an all-volunteer group called the Grounds Crew. And what we say is that we may be volunteers, but we're not amateurs. We bring horticulture together with marketing, with public relations, with design, with communication, all of these different skill sets, as well as accounting and financial. All of these skill sets have been brought together to create this garden, because this was a startup group. We were not an existing group to start off. We came together to basically make this garden designed by Pete Oudolf, who's a great inspiration. It takes a lot to build a garden, and we do all our own stuff. We do our own community outreach. We have done our own fundraising and continue to do fundraising for it. We did our own grant writing for it. We also did appeals to individual donations. We also set up digital donations to the garden. We do our own event management. We do our own communications, which is the website, oudolfgardendetroit.org, our own social media that we'll touch on, Facebook, Instagram, etc., our own news media relations, as well as email. We have over 4,000 people on our email list. We do our own construction management, and this management of this garden was quite a construction project. We also have a hired attorney, then we manage the legal side of it. We also manage government relations, because when you're dealing with a number of entities, this comes into place, as well as our own database and computer infrastructure, and of course, horticulture expertise. The big foundations that have supported this project have been the Wilson Foundation, Hudson Weber, Herb, Knight, Kresge, Davidson, DTE, Detroit Edison, Manugian, Pesler, and the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, which have been great supporters of this project, in addition to a number of individuals and to supporters like yourself. So as this independent all-volunteer group, we worked with different sponsors during different phases of this particular project. The original design phase was with the Garden Club of Michigan, utilizing the 501c3 status for taking donations to raise the money to hire Pete to design the garden. As we got out of the design phase and into the construction phase, we have been working with the Belle Isle Conservancy and utilizing their 501c3 status for the construction phase of this particular project. Simultaneously, we set up an endowment fund at the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, and that allowed us to take donations for the endowment for the perpetual care of the garden itself. Now, the maintenance group is Oudolf Garden Detroit, and we've also created the Friends of the Oudolf Garden Inc., which is now a 501c3 also during this particular phase for going forward and maintaining the garden. So what about the site? It's that main garden that we looked at with the 15 beds. It's that bioretention rain garden on the left-hand side of your screen that you saw, and then the wetlands area, which is surrounding the Carillon below the berm, as we call, and that's going to be planted in 2022. Total project size, this is not a small project. It's $4.7 million, 2.2 in design and construction alone, 2.4 in endowment to endow the garden for the maintenance budget going forward. We've raised $4.4 million in cash already, and we have about $250,000 to go. This was all done without any governmental money in this project. This is all raised from individuals and foundations and supporters of this particular project, and no governmental money was involved in the project. You can sponsor a plant on our website, select one of your favorite plants, and then sponsor it, give it a credit card. It's recognized on our website with dedications, and many people have contributed to the garden itself. Of our individual donations, 55.5% are under $100. $35 is the average donation, and donations under $250 are over 3/4 of our total number of individual donations, with an average donation of $61.67. Many people have contributed to this garden. This is the technical team. Insight Design Studio out of Ann Arbor was the landscape architect that took his design and turned it into construction drawings. Anglin Civil is the general contractor. United Lawnscape is the landscape contractor. Unmanned Aerial Solutions is the one doing the drone imagery and the GIS. Saunders and Ryan Southern Photography are Unmanned Aerial is a volunteer contractor. Sanders and Southern Photography are volunteer contractors. Mapping Solutions did the website as well as the garden map, are volunteer contractors. So other entities involved to pull this off, basically. You obviously have the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, which is operating the garden under lease from the city of Detroit under a 30-year lease agreement. We also have to deal with Detroit Water and Sewage Department to provide us water for irrigation, DTE Energy to provide us power, the Detroit Grand Prix, which happens on the island once a year, and how we manage that. Michigan LARA in regards to licensing and regulation, the Historic Preservation Office of Michigan, the Army Corps of Engineers, anytime you work with water, and then as well as Eagle Environmental Great Lakes also has regulation. Anytime we touch a road, we're dealing with the Department of Transportation. So there are a lot of players in this that you must navigate to create a garden like this. So let me give you just a quick 2019. I'm not going all the way back to 2016, 2017. We did a ceremonial groundbreaking in June. I think it was the 11th of June. By July 23rd, we had held off and had not started construction. The water kept rising. That was the high point as far as water on the island, and that's when we found that the original design was 1/3 to 40% underwater. Pete visited that second time that I mentioned in July of 2019. As a matter of fact, I think it was his third visit, come to think of it. And that's when we redesigned. He updated the garden design by October of 19. In January of 2020, and realized COVID had hit in a big way, was just starting to rise in 2020. We started the Canadian Peace Monument. That's where we disassembled it, poured a new foundation, and reassembled it. We started construction in 2020. By March 2020, there was a COVID stop in regards to contractors. And so what we like to say is why we were all sent to our rooms during COVID, a few of us snuck out and made a garden on Belle Isle. Construction restarts in 2020. Fortunately, this is outdoor construction. In August, just before Labor Day, we planted 26,000 forbs or plants and grasses in the garden in the 15 beds, and we'll talk more about that. The construction's about 90% done. In October, just before Halloween, we planted 48,000 bulbs in the garden itself. We had some spring open days in April and early May of 2021. We just finished our rain garden perennial planting in the beginning of July. And our official opening of the garden is this August, this month that we're in, on the 28th of August. Here's a rough timeline going back to November 16. Love letter from Detroit to the official opening in August 2021. So this has been a 5-year project in the making to bring this home, and this highlights some of the visits by Pete, etc. I know it's a little tough to read. So we have created a plant database. There are 163 different plant varieties, 32,000 plants, forbs, grasses, 48,000 bulbs. Obviously, we have some trees and shrubs. And we have a GIS, an intelligent database that tracks basically 2,400 plus individual groupings of individual plants in the garden itself. It is web-enabled. We have 15 plant suppliers. I think this has probably increased a little bit with the rain garden planting. And then we're doing aerial imagery during the growing season, which feeds our GIS garden map, and it's handheld and enabled to work in the garden itself. So let's talk a little bit about August. So this is going into Labor Day weekend of August 2020, and that's when we did the planting. It's in the 15 beds. The 3 styles of planting, the 32,000 that we mentioned, 90% came from Michigan growers. And then 15 individual groupings of these, and these are distinct planting areas, i.e. they do not overlap, which comes back into play. So here's another look at the garden design itself. There's the rain garden on the left, our C beds, our B beds, our A beds, then B, then A, then C, and then B, and then A again. And that's going from the grouping plan, which we'll look at, matrix, and then the block plan. There's 3 different styles of planting in the main garden itself. You are looking south from the Carillon. This is the Canadian Peace Monument here in this gray block at the top of your screen. And then the walkways we talked about before. So the block plan. On the right-hand side, this is Pete's original artwork with the Latin names of the individual plants. And then he uses initials inside his planting design. And these are the delineations of where he wants them planted in mainly squarish type areas. And he is quite well aware of the seasonality of plants as well as how well they behave with the plants next to him, as well as he has small roundish groupings overlaid on the top in a very distinct planting style. His work, some people call him a pointillist. It is just such rich artwork as you look at it. So this is the block plan. These are the A beds. This is the matrix style, and this is, as I mentioned earlier, the only garden in the United States, public garden in the United States, that's utilized all 3 of his planting design schemes. Here's his artwork on the right in his own handwriting. And then you can see he uses the grasses, Spirabolus, as a backdrop to his grouping of rounded planting clusters throughout the whole garden, etc. So they will pop up with color and structure against a field of grass, etc., for a prairie-like feeling for it. And so these are his B beds. And these are his C beds. His C beds have similarity to his block plan, but it's reinterpreted. It's reinterpreted that it's rounded and curvilinear and juxtaposed and is similar to his block plan, but an interesting assemblage of curvilinear forms. So this is a C plan. So we covered A, B, and C. So here we are taking plant deliveries in August 2020. A lot of big trucks pulled up. This is our nursery for the plants, for the forbs and the grasses. Each one of these are about 20 feet wide and 110 feet long. They are going from the parking lot into where the rain garden is now. And we have to get all these plants, and they're organized alphabetically by Latin name, as well as proportionally positioned to accommodate the number of plants that go into it. So how do we translate the design onto the garden? Literally, they take the plan and they spray paint it on the contoured, mulched beds. And you can see how this relates to it. This happens to be a B right here. And you can see the matrix in the background and the grouping of the plants going through the plan. This is what it looks like from the ground level. You can see how we used colored paint. And this was done by Roy Diblick, who worked with Pete back in 2014 and ever since on Lurie Garden, and highlighted Pete to some of the natural perennials in the north central area of the United States. And so he painted along with Austin Eichkind, who is a protege of Pete. So once the paint had gone down, then we had 1,500 stakes that were put in the garden within the painted area. And each of these stakes had a customized label on it that had the Latin name, the common name, the number, as well as the bed that it was going in, along with Pete's original artwork and naming convention. So those were all put in the ground. So then, here's an idea of looking at the individual bed map with his design on the bottom of this screen with one of our great volunteers, and then a listing of all the individual groupings for that particular bed, then the stakes. And it was really a big jigsaw puzzle to get them all properly labeled so we can go on to the next phase. And here's Roy Diblick, and he is placing plants. He is placing and spreading plants to the aesthetic of Pete Oudolf. And Pete's an old hand at this and has done it many times, and Austin are part of what we call Pete's posse of the people that he works with in the United States when they do gardens here. Well, as you remember, 2020, we were in the middle of COVID, and we had lost a lot of Detroiters. So in the middle of planting, we took the day off, and Belle Isle was filled with these images of Detroiters that we've lost to COVID, and the procession, the memorial procession and drive that went through it. And it was very moving. If you missed it, I'm sorry you did. Try to find a YouTube. It was literally overwhelming. And then we started back up again. This is the picture. You can see in the middle of our screen, our nursery is roughly just about empty, considering. And you can see the greenery in all these contour beds in the Carillon on your left. So we were tired, we recovered, and then by October, just before Halloween, we planted 48,000 bulbs. And both of these plantings were done with a mix of hired professional landscape contractors and a group of volunteers. Most of them were landscape professionals themselves, landscape architects, landscape contractors, etc., and master gardeners, because we had restrictions in regards to the number of people we could have. We had to keep them, separated by distance per COVID restrictions, and so we were very careful about that. So in the bulb planting, we had 48,000 bulbs. 95% of them came from Holland and were shipped over Air Express in pallets. 15 different beds, 30 different varieties of bulbs, 10 varieties per style of A, B, and C going in with different pallets for each bed. And here it was a little different because these are overlapping plantings as opposed to distinct planting areas. So we had to come up with a new way of doing it. Here's his A bulb design. You can see on the right his artwork is there. And you see how these curved and loosely scattered bulbs are overlapping each other. So we had to come up with a new way on how we would plant these in a systematic way. So this is his A bulb design. This is his B bulb design. You can see on the right his artwork and the Latin name, along with PDF as far as some instruction and the numbers that go along with it. And on the plan, you can see the number per each individual bulb. This is how exacting the process is. And here is our C plan. So this is done after we planted all the bulbs and the forbs and the grasses. And you can see his listing on the right. And these were loosely spread. On the website, you can always find listing of our plants as well as, so these are the bulbs in A, B, and C. This is all available on our website. You can direct people there if they're interested in what's there. And this is what it looked like. Here's our map with tick marks as far as distance and his design. This is an aerial image showing the polygons for each individual grouping of bulbs. And here's a big bucket of bulbs, and we went through buckets upon buckets upon buckets of bulbs as we went through the different varieties that we were spreading out. This is Austin himself, and he is literally spreading the bulbs. And so what he would do is he'd grab the bucket of bulbs for that particular variety. He would dump them into that carrying satchel or that garden bag, and then he had a cellular data iPad around his neck, and he could pick the bulb, and then it would show him in the garden where those bulbs went. And he would go through and do one variety of bulbs, and then he'd check it off, and the next variety of bulbs would go through, and he'd spread them again. That's what they looked like in the on the ground. So it was like an Easter egg hunt. And then we brought our volunteers and our professionals in with 6-foot separation on either side of a particular bed and have them basically plant anything that they came across in front of them as they went through the garden, etc. Then once they got 6 feet apart from the people across from them, as we were working with 10 on either side going toward the center of a bed, one group of 10 would pull out and the other group of 10 would finish the particular bed itself. It was quite a project. So the most recent planting has been July of 2021. This is the perennial rain garden design. So here are the perennials with Pete's design. His design from January 2021 and his scale on the bottom. And so this was just planted, and this is what it looked like as they were planting. The trees and the shrubs were in, but the perennials were going in to complement them. And you can see how they're using spray paint again on how you basically put the plants in the proper location per Pete's design. So a little bit on communications and education. We like our visitors to try to go to oudolfgardendetroit.org because they can learn about the garden there. They can contribute to the garden there. They can volunteer like you are volunteering for the garden. They can explore Pete's designs. They can watch drone aerial imagery. They can look at the garden map, the interactive garden map, and they also can become part of the garden itself. So this is the website itself. It's very straightforward. Highly recommend it. It is also mobile enabled, so it'll resize for different size screens down to your smartphone. Here are the bulbs list as well as a plant list is just below this on the website. On the interactive garden map, which is available via your smartphone, and we have a QR code in the garden where people can literally use their camera and start taking a picture of it. It'll give them a pop-up of a URL location. They can go to it and they can look at what is now in bloom or look at the interactive garden map. This has a feature on the top right of turning the bulbs and the trees and the shrubs on as far as the design, or the forbs and the grasses. And then it always has the latest drone GIS enabled imagery where you can zoom into one particular plant and see where it is. And then when you click on it, on the left hand side of your screen, it'll come up with a pop-up with the Latin name of it, the quantity in that area, the bed that it's in, as well as the bulb depth in this situation, as well as a plant, and you can maximize that picture of the plant and to take a look at. Also from here, you can sponsor a plant and support the endowment for the garden. The home button's on the top left-hand side, then you can zoom in and zoom out. If you're on a handheld or your smartphone, obviously you can pinch your fingers together or apart to navigate your way around the map. We also have a plant quiz, and this can be set up that you can quiz yourself on plants. You can also use it in a learn mode where it will show you the plant and the name, as well as, since this image, we have added pronunciation, which was one of the great things about this, as well as the interactive, is our very own Richard Thomas, a member of the grounds crew, did about 2 days of research to get the proper pronunciation of all these Latin names so that we could share it with all our visitors to the garden. It's been a great help to me. It was like studying Italian vocabulary. And I just go through it, and I've been learning a lot of the plants that I had no experience with when I first started out. In addition, we have aerial imagery, and we have drone flyovers of the garden to give you an idea of what's going on in the garden, how it looks, and you can see this design as we look west to downtown Detroit, the Carillon on the left, as well as the berm. This is one from basically November of last year. Also on the website, as well as when you use the QR code, is Now in Bloom. This is a great resource because what it is images, and Ryan Southen, our very own volunteer photographer, has been creating these fantastic images of what is in bloom at one particular time in the garden. And so as a visitor, they can come down and see what's in bloom so they have a better idea what to look for in the garden itself. And so these are images, and you can maximize these images and take a look at them. And this, of course, can be utilized on your smartphone in the garden itself. We also have a monthly newsletter basically during the growing season that gives people updates on what's going on in the garden itself, what to expect, etc. We haven't put one out for about a month or so because it's been a little busy getting ready for the official opening. In addition, we have a Facebook page. Please follow us, become a friend, share, etc. All this type of social media gets people engaged in the garden. They have a better idea of what's happening in the garden. And of course, we have an Instagram page, and many people are posting to this on an ongoing basis, our friends as well as Oudolf Garden Detroit, to keep you up to date on what is going on in the garden. And as I mentioned, this is also, mobile enabled for, especially if you have cellular data, which most smartphones do. But if you have a tablet, you have a slightly larger screen. You may recognize this. Here's your zoom in, zoom out. Here's your home button. This round circle up here in the top right with the crosshatch on it basically is the button to enable your GPS, which will then put you within about 10, 12 feet of your location so you can see where you are in the garden itself. Then this hamburger expands out to show you the different designs or the aerial imagery, etc. This is the type of pollinators that we're attracting in the garden. This was in the spring against these against these daffodils. So, what is it to be a garden guide? The idea is you're like a docent at the Detroit Institute of Art. You are our ambassadors. The idea is to be friendly and welcoming to all. Everyone's welcome in the garden. And this garden was built for everyone to visit. Be open. If you don't know the answer to a question, that's okay. I know this was an information dump that a lot of things were going on. But my favorite quote is from Richard Thomas, who also did the pronunciation. There's a new show every 10 days. So have fun as a garden guide. Have them come to oudolfgardendetroit.org. Here is the QR code that you will see in the garden. And if you use your camera, and you can even do it right now, it'll take you to a landing page and show you what is in bloom or the garden map. And so people can interact with the garden in the garden itself. I want to thank you. Remember, no riding bikes in the garden, no picking plants, pick up after your dogs that are on leash, be friendly, be welcoming, and thank you so much for volunteering to help out with Oudolf Garden Detroit as our garden guides, our ambassadors in the garden. I can be reached at duncan@oudolfgardendetroit.org. And thank you very much for taking the time to review this so you have a better background on the garden. I look forward to seeing you at the in-person training where we'll be in the beds, in the garden, talking about plants. Thanks so much, and have a great day.